Welcome back to Giant Monster Games. My name is Adrian, and a lot of people have been requesting this deck, so I finally got around to making it. It is going to be Abzan Midrange, and we are doing a mid-budget of this, because I figured if you're going to make a 3-color deck and you're going to make it so it actually feels good to play, let's push the budget up a little bit more than like the $60 normal decks I make. We're going to put this at $200. So it's still not super expensive. You could probably sub out some of the more expensive lands for cheaper lands until you get them, and the deck will play less consistently, but still quite well. Before I actually break the deck down and go into all the details, I would like to throw some huge shoutouts to all of the Patreon supporters. You guys are helping make videos like this one possible. Thank you so much. Also, I would like to throw a super special shoutout to Emrakul's lost twin sister, Cthulhu. The world needs more spaghetti monsters, and you are filling that role. Thank you so much. Okay, moving over into the actual deck now. What exactly is Abzan Midrange? Kinda just feels like I'm throwing out random words for you, which theoretically I am. Abzan means it is a 3-color deck. It is going to be black, white, and green. And Abzan, specifically the word Abzan, comes from the Tarkir block, where there was a bunch of different clans that all had 3 colors in them. Abzan is one of those clans that have transitioned into nowadays modern, along with Jeskai. You probably hear the word Jeskai floating around. So there's a bunch of them that have come over, and now we have Abzan. Mid-range just means it is going to be trying to go for the mid-game to win. It's not going to be trying to kill your opponent by turn 4. We're actually going to be trying getting there on turn 5, 6, 7, somewhere like this. We're going to be getting value out of all of our creatures, because our deck is largely made up of value creatures that, once the ball gets rolling, are really hard to stop. So, let's jump into it now, starting out with what do we actually have? What are these value creatures? Well, Siege Rhino and Scavenging Ooze, which are fantastic cards. You probably heard all about Siege Rhino when it was back in its day, when it was the craziest card on the block. Nowadays, it's a bulk card almost, because it just doesn't see any play, but it is fantastic, so we're going to play it. Siege Rhino, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 3 life, and you gain 3 life. It is also a 4/5 trample for 4, which is super value town, especially in a mid-range deck. This is actually the only 4-drop we have. Everything else is 3-drop and below. So, Siege Rhino coming in, smashing faces, gonna be awesome. Also, it's essentially a burn spell. If you notice this, if your opponent's at 3 life and you need to close the game, playing a Siege Rhino will do that for you. Scavenging Ooze, which you've probably seen a lot because Scavenging Ooze is in a lot of modern decks. It is a 2/2 for 2, which is literally on par, which is fine, but its ability is what makes it really special. You can exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Scavenging Ooze and you gain 1 life. So, if your opponent is playing something that needs a graveyard, you can eat the stuff out of their graveyard before they actually get to do anything with it, which is the whole point of playing Scavenging Ooze. Also, Scavenging Ooze just becomes really big and scary as you kind of get to the mid to late game, which is the whole point of playing a mid-range deck. Super rad, if I might add. Now, both these cards are also gaining us a bunch of life because we do have a bunch of ways of taking a bunch of damage ourselves, so the life gain is super relevant, something I would like to point out. The next 2 cards we have are Courser of Krufix and Lingering Souls. So, Lingering Souls isn't a creature, but it is gonna get us creatures, because it is super duper value. We are playing both a white and a black deck. Why not playing Lingering Souls? Lingering Souls creates 2 1/1 spirit creature tokens with flying. Fantastic. Also does flashback, so we can play it again out of our graveyard, which gives us stuff to do if we need options down the road. We are only running 3 in the main deck because we're also going to be running in the one in the sideboard, which I'll get to once we get to the sideboard, but just in case you're wondering why are we only running 3 in the main deck, because we have other cards we want to be running. Courser of Krufix, on the other hand, is also a fantastic card and seen a lot of play during the standard of Abzan. By that I mean playing when Abzan was being played in standard. Courser of Krufix is you may play with the top card of your library revealed, so you get to see what's on top of your library. You may play the top card of your library if it's a land, so we get to basically play lands for free, which kind of fix our draw. So you never want to be playing the lands at your hand. If you have a card or land on top, you want to play that first, which is awesome. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 1 life. So another little bit of life buffering here. So Abzan Midrange usually can pair up against something like Burn pretty well, because we're going to be gaining just enough life to make it so Burn has a hard time with us, especially because Burn is going to try to close out the game by like turn 4. We should, by the time we're up and rolling, be not dying by turn 4, which is kind of our objective. So, the next 2 cards we have are kind of more utility cards, and cards that could be swapped out of this deck, because they are the weakest 2 cards. We have Wall of Omens and Ruin Raider. So, Wall of Omens is literally doing one thing in this deck. Actually, it's doing 2 things. because you don't want to play anything in Modern that unless it's doing more than one thing. So Wall of Omens draws us a card when it comes into play. So it's basically 2-drop, draw a card. But it is a 0/4, which is very relevant because it actually blocks a lot of aggro decks. If you can get a Wall of Omens into play, you can usually blocking any aggro deck that is going to be trying to swing in for early game damage. So it's largely here to just make it so we can get to the late game, but the card draw is also really nice. And then Pirate Bob, well, I'm going to refer to him as Ruin Raider. It has Raid at the beginning of your end step. If you attacked with a creature this turn, reveal the top card of your library, put it into your hand, and lose life equal to its converted mana cost. So for the most part, we're going to be losing 2 life whenever we trigger this guy, which isn't the end of the world. Unfortunately, this happens at our end step, and we had to attack with the creature, which the attacking with the creature thing is actually really easy. We have Lingering Souls to getting, spirits that are flying through and attacking, attacking with flying, and we also have stuff like Siege Rhino. The one Siege Rhino is in play, we're attacking with it almost every single turn because it has Trample, because even if your opponent wants to chump block it, it still is going to probably do damage, likely. So Pirate Bob is decent enough that I'm playing it in this deck. He would be replaced with actual Bob, which is Dark Confidant, which, I mean, if you have the money, I would highly recommend upgrading this guy to Dark Confidant just to get extra better card draw, especially extra better card draw on your upkeep rather than on your end step. So those are all of our creatures. The other thing that this Abzan Midrange deck does is it has a lot of control elements, which is what makes the deck really hard to play against. Not only do we have big, awesome creatures, but we also have a lot of way of controlling the board. So what do we have? First thing, Hand Disruption. Inquisition, Kozilek, and Duress are going to be helping keeping our opponent off doing whatever they're doing. Obviously, Duress should be and could be replaced with Thoughtseize. If you have the money, you can replace Duress with Thoughtseize for 1-for-1. In this case, we're trying to cut down the budget, so we're trying to find ways of saving money. So both of these cards allow us to make our opponent reveal their hand. We get to choose a card, and then they get to discard that card. Duress specifically can't target creature or land cards, and Inquisition can't target cards with converted mana cost 3 or more, or land cards as well. So we do have some limiting factors, but again, for us, we want to remove stuff that's going to be fast from our opponent, not big and scary crazy from our opponent, so that's usually the idea here. The next 2 cards are removal cards. We are running Abrupt Decay and Cast Down. So Cast Down is the new, latest, greatest, not Fatal Push card. And because we're not running a lot of ways of things bouncing off the table, we don't have very many actual, fetch lands, so we want to run something like Cast Down instead. So basically, destroy target non-legendary creature. Pretty self-explanatory there. And then Abrupt Decay destroys any permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. So Abrupt Decay is super fantastic because it blows up a lot of stuff. Ensnaring bridges, it blows up a lot of key pieces, it blows up creatures, it blows up enchantments, it blows up artifacts, destroys a lot of things, a lot of stuff, which is really awesome. Also, it can't be countered, which is really relevant in some of the way that Modern is shifting right now, where there is becoming more and more control decks out there which have, been able to survive now that Jace has come out and a bunch of other cards. I honestly would want to run more Abrupt Decays rather than just 2. And Cast Down, obviously you can be running other stuff. Maelstrom Pulse would be a really good card in replace of this if you have the extra money. Probably want to run 2 Maelstrom Pulse, not 4 Maelstrom Pulse. And then probably 2 Fatal Push as well. Possibly more. Something you'll have to think about. And then the last card we have Farseek, which is totally a flex spot for this deck. Because we're playing a budget version and we don't have a lot of fetch lands, we need a way of fixing our mana. And Farseek is going to be doing that for us. So we basically get to go and fetch our library for a Lyland, Plains, Swamp, or Mountain and put that into the battlefield tapped, and then we jump our library. If you are playing a better version of this deck that has a better mana base, then you can replace this with a melody of other awesome creatures, or, removal spells, technically. No, you have some options here. If you are upgrading this deck, this is a card that can come out if you have a better mana base. Speaking of mana bases, let's talk about the land section of this deck now. First of all, we have Field of Ruin and Shambling Vent. These are our utility lands. Field of Ruin is just allowing us to have some mainboard hate against other man lands, or Tron in some cases. It destroys the land, and then we get to go fetch land, and they get to go fetch land, and everyone's happy. Shambling Vent, on the other hand, is another way of us gaining life, because it also is a man land itself. It can turn into a 2/3 white-black elemental creature token with lifelink, so we can swing in, gain a little bit of life. It's nice because sometimes we're draining ourselves with Pirate Bob a little bit more than we would actually like to, and this also is going to allow us to stabilize if we kind of get to the mid-game and we need to kind of push past. Moving on to the next things, though. The next two lands we have are Llanowar Wastes and Caves of Koilos. So both of these guys are pain lands. They produce colorless mana if we need colorless mana, but they also produce black or white or black and green, depending on what we need. They are in here because we need budget lands that do this. We could replace these with better stuff, but those lands that we want to replace them with cost more. So yeah, some lands fixing. Next, we have a couple lands you would see if you were playing Modern all the time. We have Windswept Heath, which is a fetch land, and then we have Godless Shrine and Overgrown Tomb, which are cards you would ideally go fetch with said fetch land. So there's literally just they're here because we need to have some better consistency, and this is kind of how we're going to do it. So the shock lands, if you're unfamiliar with shock lands, they come into play, you pay 2 life if you want to have them come into play untapped, which normally you do. I'd say about 70-80% of the time you do, so then it is untapped and life is grand. Windswept Heath allows you to go and fetch up a forest or a plains. Both of these cards are forests or plains, so you can easily go and do that, so we can fix our mana really quickly, finding exactly the cards you need. So, rad. We need this in order to play this deck properly. And then, lastly, we have a bunch of basic lands. We have forests, plains, and swamps to round out all of our mana base needs. And that is the entire main deck, but before we break down this sideboard and the upgrade section, if you want to pick this deck up in paper, go over to Flipside Gaming and use promo code GIANTMONSTERGAMES to get 10% off your online purchase. Or, if you want to pick this deck up for MTGO, there is a link to Card Hoarder in the description below this video. Both of these things help out the channel directly by you playing Magic. So, if you want to do that, that would be amazing. Okay, jumping over to the sideboard. Starting out with my new favorite card, Dampening Sphere and Duress. Well, Duress isn't my new favorite card, but Damping Sphere definitely is my new favorite card. So both of these cards are helping us deal with decks, specifically stuff like Storm and or Tron, where our opponent's going to be trying to race their way up and do crazy stuff. We can do that with Dampening Sphere, because Dampening Sphere makes it so if a land would produce more than 1 mana, instead it produces colorless mana and only 1 of it. Also, it does each spell a player casts costs 1 more to cast for each spell that has been played this turn. So Storm or other fast aggro decks that are just kind of spewing their hand onto the table, Damping Sphere is really handy, especially because we are a mid-range deck. We need to get to turn 4, turn 5 before we really start pushing the advantage. Damping Sphere is going to help us do that. Duress, again, we're running 2 more of it because we do want the option to pull stuff out of our opponent's hand. If we're not playing against a deck that has any creatures, there is no point in having a bunch of creature removal stuff in the deck. We can replace those with Duress and other better value cards to slow down our opponent. The next 2 cards we have are Golgari Charm and Nile Spellbomb. So, Golgari Charm is kind of an interesting one in this deck. I kind of put it in here because I tested out with it and it seemed really neat. So, basically we can use it to wipe tokens if we need to wipe tokens. We can also use it to destroy an enchantment, which is less relevant for the card, but is the regenerate each creature you control that's actually most commonly what we're going to be using it for. So it basically allows us to get around destroy effects, which is really good. So that's kind of what we're using it for most of the time. So, yeah, seems like a weird card. It's definitely, I think, more of a budget card. I don't think you would be playing this card so much in your sideboard if you were playing an upgraded sideboard, but in this version, I think it actually works pretty well. And then Spellbomb, Nile Spellbomb specifically, is just another way of wiping our opponent's graveyard. We have a bunch of graveyard-based decks that are a little bit hard for us to match up against. Hollow One tends to be like a 50-50 matchup. If we're playing against a legitimate Dredge, then yeah, we're going to have a lot more problems because they're just way faster than us. So Spellbomb allows us to wipe their graveyard, which is really handy. Also, if we have the extra black mana, we can also draw a card off it, which is why we have it. Then we have Pithing Needle and Ghost Quarter. Ghost Quarter, again, if we are running up against Tron, like specifically Eldrazi Tron, we just need a little bit of an edge, so we can throw in Ghost Quarter and usually Dampening Sphere to help cut down their ability to do a lot of crazy stuff. Ghost Quarter, quite good. Also, if you're running against a bunch of decks that are running a bunch of man lands, so I'm thinking stuff like Jund, or if you're running against Ponza, Ponza tends to be really hard for us to match up as well, so you can throw this in against Ponza. So, a whole bunch of options. Ghost Quarter is really good. You guys can see how Ghost Quarter is awesome. And then Pithing Needle is actually usually being played against stuff like Karn, Ugin, and Liliana of the Veil. So it's kind of a one-off card here. I only have 1 of it in the deck, because I'm assuming people that are building this deck are not going to be playing like super high-end Magic. If you are, you're probably going to want 2 Pithing Needles, but I have 1 in here because it's designed to be a little bit for everyone, so that's what we have. Single Bit the Needle, naming Liliana, or other things that you don't want activated. I say Liliana because lots of times we're only playing 1 or 2 or 3 creatures, and having creatures getting sacrificed doesn't really help us out very much. And then the last 2 cards on our sideboard, we have Lingering Souls, another last copy of it, and then a couple versions of Nature's Claim. Nature's Claim, really good against stuff like Boggles, really good against stuff that's just gonna be putting stuff on the table. I'm thinking Ensnare and Bridge at this point, actually. So, Nature's Claim, you guys know what it does. It destroys target artifact or enchantment, target player gains 4 life, which the gain 4 life is annoying, but it's not that bad at the end of the day. We can usually play through it because we have bigger, better, more high-value creatures. And that is the entire deck. I am not going to throw an upgrade section in because this is kind of a classical version of Abzan. The more modern Abzan decks don't really look like this. They're doing a lot more graveyard shenanigan stuff, and it would take a lot of replacing of cards for me to shift that way. So instead, I kind of just mentioned the cards you would want to be playing as we were talking about the video. So that's what it's gonna be. Until next time though, my name's Adrian, this is Giant Monster Games, thanks for watching, and don't forget to game like a giant monster.